Where is Doddy? He's not usually this late. Really looking forward to a gravel ride.
Hey!
What are you doing on that?
Oh, sorry I'm late. Gravel ride, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's basically a 20-year-old mountain bike, isn't it? So I've turned out on a modern 20-year-old mountain bike.
Right, I'm going to convince you that's just all kinds of wrong for gravel. Let's go.
All right. Whatever.
Right, let's get the Garmin on.
Right, what's the score then? What are we doing?
Well, I've planned a nice ride, some climbs, some views, be about 70k, you know, nice and chilled.
70 or 17?
70, you know, so it's just
you
a
said
chilled
it's going to
ride.
be a chilled ride though?
Yeah, it is. We'll be done by lunchtime. That's a couple of hour ride, that
What are
is.
you talking about, you nutter?
Yeah, easy. The thing about gravel bikes is they're designed to be efficient pedalers, especially over long distances. So even someone like myself, who's definitely not a roadie who trains regularly, I can maintain about 25 to 30 kilometers an hour on this. And most of that is just maintaining my momentum. So if an XC ride is an average of about 15 kilometers an hour, then a 70k ride is about 4.5 hours long. Averaging 25 kilometers an hour, that 70k ride is about 2.5 hours. So those are two completely different rides.
Okay, well, 70 kilometres as far as mountain bikes go, that's really a proper XC race, a marathon even, at least an all day. It's a serious bit of riding and completely different to gravel as well, like Anna was saying. So gravel, you're going to be turning around the pedals, you're going to be going a bit quicker as your average speed. Mountain bike, don't forget you're going up, down, over, along. There's obstacles, you're going to be doing a lot of coasting as well. The terrain is going to be changing, there's going to be rocks, roots, all sorts of different stuff. You're going to be running your tyres, which are much larger in volume to most gravel bikes. You're going to be running them a lot softer in general, so that saps speed and a bit of efficiency in terms of being able to cover ground a bit better with more control. And although the bikes are kind of fairly similar in terms of weight, your average speed is going to be a bit lower on one of these. And do you know what? All this talk across country just makes me want to go and ride single track, to be honest.
So this is my Canyon Grizzle. It's a CF SL7, which is Canyon's pretty much top spec mechanical gravel bike, and it's only a little over £2,000 for this carbon frame and spec. And I've upgraded it to some Spank Vibracore wheels to take the buzz out of here, but it's about as mountain biking as gravel gets, with 650B wheels and 50mm of tyre clearance in there. But you know, it's racked to the max there. I'm really going to enjoy lacing this up with some bags and some extra water bottles and taking it on an adventure, which I just wouldn't want to do on a cross-country bike, maybe especially a full suspension cross-country bike, because I'd just be loading it up with so much weight. And having drop bars as well just means that I can change my hand position 2 or 3 times and also get into a nice aero position for those long, straight roads for getting to my camping destination.
Okay, so you probably know me by now that I love mountain bikes. I think they are the most versatile and the best bicycle on earth because you can ride them anywhere. So why wouldn't I pick a mountain bike in place of a gravel bike? So what I've chosen for today's video is the Orbea Alma. So this is their XCO race bike. Now this particular one is the top spec one with the Mayo custom paint job on it. It actually retails for £6.5 in the UK, and it comes, bearing in mind that's a custom paint job, comes with a Fox 32 factory fork. Now I've actually chosen to spec the rigid fork called the Spirit on here. Now the frame is one of the lightest available, 830 grams. And I mean, this is for a mountain bike, that's road bike weight, that's crazy light. And then the fork as well, 500 grams. And you're talking about a rider here that's 92 kilograms riding something this light. This bike is purpose designed to go as fast as possible, up, down, over and along. And I'm convinced it's going to do exactly that on gravel. Now there is one thing that it won't have that Anna's bike definitely has got. Well, in fact, two things. Her bike has got a capability to run packs and panniers and various different things on there because it's purpose designed for the job. And I'll never tell her this, but that is really the defining thing that makes gravel bikes really cool. You don't really want to overload a cross-country bike because they're just built to race in the weight that they are. And also the hand position thing. Now, I love the position. I don't have any issue with it not having drop handlebars. I prefer this, but there are limitations on longer rides. So yeah, she is right, unfortunately, because you've got the hoods, you've got the flats on the top, you've got the drops, you can move around, you've got better aerodynamics, you've got overall change of position. Now you could say it could fit bar ends or some of the aftermarket products you can get on here, but in truth, I like it as it is. Oi, oi, Savaloy. I see a bit of trail there.
No, this is the gravel trail, this way.
No
We've got
way.
some miles
No
to
way.
munch. So I usually have my sleeping bag like in a bag on the handlebars, and then I don't know if I'm going to get some mounts for the water on the forks, and then maybe have a frame bag. Or if I'm just gonna
Oh man, I'm not even gonna lie. I can get down a pretty good lick on this thing. It is really light and really quick, but that is noticeably quicker even with her on it. And I say that in a nice possible way, like I've got long levers, so I guess it's like the combination of things, like she's lighter than me, she's gonna climb quicker, but that bike definitely seems to go up quicker. I'm not gonna say I'm on the wrong bike, I'm gonna say it's the wrong trail, put it that way.
Okay, granted, Doddy's got bigger levers than me, he's a bit stronger and faster, but you know what? The gravel can give you a more aerodynamic position, and that could save about half a kilometre an hour. And if you're in the drops, that could save an extra half a kilometre an hour, which doesn't sound like much, but going 1 kilometre an hour faster over 70k is going to get you to the cafe at over 5 minutes sooner. But for me, gravel isn't always about speed. For me, it's about little effort and just coasting around, admiring your scenery for a change, not just blasting down single track and trying to get your adrenaline up. So, you know, gravel is the chilled choice. Focusing on the terrain too much. I mean, I love single track, I love enduro, but look at this place. When you're chilling out and you don't have to look at the ground, you look at your surroundings. Look at this place.
Do you know what, I hate to agree with you. You are right. There's far too much time spent on mountain bikes. And I'm the first to say this because I love looking at stuff around me and taking photos, but actually, when you're out riding mountain bikes, you're just so focused on the actual riding that you do miss a lot of the beauty that's around.
Yeah, and how often do we get to chat like this and ride a bike?
Never, yeah. but still, the fact that I'm on this bike, I do just want to zip off everywhere and hit the trails. You know, it's a double-edged sword. Oh, looky, looky, looky.
What?
I can see a trail.
Oh no, it's a gravel ride.
Come on, entertain me. I've been riding this thing on on these old gravel roads. Come on, let's have a little bit of single
You
track.
really think that bike's going to be that much better in there?
Yeah, it's a mountain bike.
It's a mountain bike shaped
Yeah,
object,
come
if
on.
you ask me.
Let's go.
Fine.
Oh, fighting talk, oh my God. All right. I think you got me here, okay?
Yeah, you're
This is
struggling as much as me.
Definitely way trickier than I bargained for.
So why didn't you bring your normal cross-country bike then?
That's a lot trickier than I remember it being in the 90s, trying to keep traction on a rigid bike.
Exactly.
It zips along pretty good though.
Ah, so you're saying it's rubbish on the gravel and rubbish on there?
That's not what I'm saying. Blame the user, not the bike. Yeah, all right. Well, clearly the gravel bike is going to be better on gravel, but I'm just trying to prove a point that gravel's fairly similar to old school mountain biking. And in the best intention, this is kind of like a modern equivalent of an old mountain bike.
Yeah, you bought the most gravel mountain bike you could possibly bring.
Sometimes you're a nightmare. I'm never going to win anything with you around. Okay, so what have we learned today then? Well, this is a fantastic bike for riding gravel on, but I've got to say, hang my head in shame. Really, if you're actually going to do multi-day riding, you want to do bike packing and touring and stuff, yes, of course you can do it on a mountain bike, but you will not do it better than you can on one of those. It's purpose-built for the job, especially if you want to do it in the most efficient way possible.
And you know what, for pure gravel rides where I just want to look up and see the scenery and get some distance in the legs, I do choose the gravel. And I choose this for bike packing as well. I mean, look at it, it's ready for adventure, all of these rack mounts on it. But that's not to say you have to have multiple bikes, is it? That was perfectly adequate today. You did gravel just fine. There's no need to have multiple bikes.
I did, but disclaimer, I did basically borrow this bike just for this video, and I would not have ridden my regular mountain bike on gravel.
We've all seen pro riders testing prototypes dotted around the world at races or on separate test facilities. But what are these guys and girls looking at that can't be tested in a lab?
Well, thanks to 5Dev and with the help of pro downhill racer Nico Mullally, we're going to be learning how to real world test.
On this
And these.
So thank you to 5Dev for making this video happen. We're here at Canoga Bike Park in North Carolina, built by Nico and his brother. The perfect place to test new products.
Yeah, and we've got a bunch of 5Dev cranks so that we can test out different crank lengths and discuss why it is so important, especially for short riders like myself. And we'll be using 5Dev's crotchometer.
Cut.
Crotchometer, should I be worried?
No, don't worry. I told HR about the crotchometer and they got a sweat on, so I found a stunt double. The crotchometer then, essentially a device that isolates just measuring your inseam. Take myself, for example, at 6 foot tall, you might think, oh, Rich is really tall. He needs a nice long crank, but actually I've got a fairly long body and short legs. And this is gonna tell me exactly like that. And I was gonna measure it on Anna. HR didn't like it, so I brought in this guy, Bobo. So Bobo, if you wouldn't mind placing that between your legs and sliding that up until you get a little resistance, should we say?
I've never said no to that request.
You're welcome.
Oh,
wow. Oh, down.
Rich definitely has a bigger inseam than me.
What this is going to do is obviously measure inside. He's in his riding shoes as well, so it'll be an accurate measurement and give him a rough, within 5 millimeter measurement of what kind of crank length he should be running. Is it up in there?
It's a very personal situation
right.
here. Are things supposed to be resting, or do I just get
I would say, I mean, I wouldn't go pinching. I'd say resting.
Okay. That's about right.
Yeah, okay, pass it here. I'll take that end. How about that? So this is suggesting for sort of all mountain and enduro riding between the 145 and the 150 mark.
Oh, look at that.
And that's for your height of?
5'6.5", 5'7".
Okay. See what, let's try it on some different people, see what it says. Let's see what it says for myself. So let's get on in there. Slide that bad boy up. Oh, Bobo's warmed it up for me. 162 to 167. That's way shorter than what I'm running.
Nah, that's well above average. I think it's usually like 5.
All right, Rochelle, how tall are you?
I'm about 5'2".
Yeah, I'm like 5'1". What sort of cranks do you usually run?
I
out of
run
interest?
165, which is like kind of like the
Yeah, I
average,
do.
the average
But that is
crank.
like kind of the smallest I can usually get hold
Yeah.
of. But let's see what we're working with here. So right into the zip bones. Okay. For enduro or mountain, I'm looking at 155s.
Oh, that's not bad.
Like 152 up to 157. What about you?
See, I think I might be a tiny bit taller, but my legs are insanely short.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, like 150.
150, yeah. So proof that we're only like an inch apart, but
Yeah,
actually
that's-
completely different crank lengths.
That's pretty crazy.
Ah, well, let's go and try some,
Yeah,
shall we?
that'll be interesting.
Yeah, amazing. So it's a bit of a who's who of influencers here in this wood, isn't it? Because I've got Seth here from Burn Peak. And, well, tell me, how tall are you? Because you've used the crotchometer, and what did it tell you?
I did. The crotchometer told me I was a 145
Yeah.
for cranks, and I mean all my bikes come with 170s. I had always intended on changing these out to 165s, and now that I've tried 145s, I just can't believe I've been riding 170s my whole life. I ended up settling on 155s because it's like sort of in the middle, but your hips move less. It's like I'm just moving my legs, and yeah. I've been doing it wrong my whole life.
So then we've come into the woods where we're going to do a bit of an experiment. We're going to set a baseline, right? Yeah. So both of us are on our normal bike. I've got some 170mm cranks on this size large, which is what it comes stocked with. What about you, Anna?
Yeah, I've also got 170s because, interestingly, I am quite familiar with 170s. My small Mega came spec'd with 170s, same as your large Rallon.
All right, well, look, let's spin some laps and then swap some cranks and see how it feels, right?
Little
Whoa.
strike.
It's tricky, Anna.
Oh! I've hit the tree and everything.
Wow.
Oh, there we go.
And we've made it.
So no surprises, but I've got to say the low profile cranks, even on these 170s, do lend themselves to sort of pedaling through rock gardens, don't they? Because the spindle's like really low down on them.
Exactly, 100%. The way that they've designed that and actually shifted where the spindle is on the crank itself does help. I've even got 5Dev's sort of very low profile pedals on there, but I did clip a pedal at one point going through there. So I'm intrigued to now switch them out and get the 165s on.
Yeah, well, let's go and do it, shall we?
To the mechanic area.
It's actually crazy to look at the 155 and the 170 side by side. There's actually a really big difference, and it seems crazy to me now when I'm looking at them that we cut down bar sizes, but we don't think about crank lengths. Maybe we should be.
Okay, Anna, we are at the top for our next run of the day. Now this time, according to the crotchometer, we've got our correct size cranks on. So I'm running a 165. What have you got on yours?
155, got the Enduro R specs on there, same as yours, mine in silver, looking good.
Yeah, right. So you know what? We've done a little spin up. I think we're going to sort of spin back down and then maybe sort of catch up and see what we think, because it's quite different to what we're used to.
I've got some thoughts already.
Yeah, likewise,
but
likewise.
Let's test it, shall we?
All right, Tortuga it, Canuga.
Let's do it. Woo! He's off.
That was good. Okay, so that run was on our recommended crank length
It is.
per the crotchometer.
Yeah.
I'm going to kick things off. I'm going to throw it to you. How did it feel?
I absolutely love it, actually, because I've gone for like 15 mil difference. This is a big difference for me, and that's about 30 mil of bringing my feet in as well. So my hips are really squared off, and I feel a lot more powerful, like pushing, pumping and pushing into lips.
Okay.
I would say I don't notice it so much on the flowy bike parky stuff. I don't notice it.
Yeah.
But when it gets twiddly, I feel a little more in control.
Yeah, I mean, you were flying on that big jump. It was well good to see. Yeah, you were going for it.
Cased it a little bit.
Ah, no, you know, it's good, it's good. Okay, so my feelings, I've dropped down only 5 mil. So like the difference there, I did find harder to sort of differentiate between before and after. I think you can definitely notice on a cadence point of view, spinning up and just actually bringing the bike up to speed a little quicker. But I think, again, I still would like to go a bit shorter. So I think I'd really like to try some 160s, maybe some 155s. Because like yourself, on the smoother stuff, the 165s, it was very hard to tell the difference. When it got a little choppier on this trail we've done with a few little sprints like that, so like that quick acceleration was there. But yeah, I think a 155 or a 160, I think 160 is going to be my sweet spot. But I reckon a little bit of lunch.
Yeah.
And then should we catch up with Nico as well, the man himself,
For
and just
sure.
see how he sets his bike up, sort of the 5 Dev Frameworks
How he
relationship.
tests stuff in real life. Yeah,
All
let's
right.
go do that.
Let's go grab Asani. Come on then. Okay, Nico, thanks for joining us. You've got a pretty special relationship with yourself, Frameworks, and 5Dev. Kind of how does that work? How do you feed off of each other?
Well, they're a huge CNC manufacturer that has a ton of resource. So me trying to make custom frames, that's a really nice relationship to have. They can make a lot of the parts that I need to build these custom frames. And then also the parts, any components that I'd want to try, they're open to making for me as well.
So I've noticed we've got a few of those parts on this bike here, and you were telling me about some earlier, how the parts that we used to be made in 2 and welded together, they now obviously have the resources that they can make it into 1, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like this bike, the bottom bracket, main pivot, shock mount is all one piece, and that actually used to be, I think, 5 pieces. It was the chain guide ISCG tabs, the BB shell, the connection to the main pivot, and then the shock mount, all welded together. And every time you weld something together, there's a chance that it moves under heat. So this, you locate it off the BB and everything's precise.
Awesome. All right, thanks. Well, look, an incredible bike. I look forward to having a bit of a spin later.
Enjoy.
Thanks, man. Real good to catch up with Nico. They're very insightful on just sort of how he goes about testing things. And it's not just sort of test it, that feels right, all right, that'll do. It's testing multiples of the same thing in very slight different variations. So speaking of that, we've changed crank length again.
Yep.
And I've gone down to a 155. It's minuscule.
Yeah, I know, the pendulum has swung and I've gone to a childlike 145 to see what that's like.
Right.
And already I'm noticing a difference just riding over across the car park because my saddle now feels too low because obviously the saddle to pedal height has got shorter.
Yeah.
So someone like yourself, you could get more dropper clearance in there if you ran
Definitely. I've come down 15 mil from that original size. So with that, I think we should go and ride them and then sort of catch up again afterwards and see what we think.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right.
I'm excited.
Right, okay, Anna, so sort of the descending portion of this final crank test is done, and we're now onto the uphill, and I think it's this part where it's almost really crucial when it comes to crank length, and something that 5Dev sort of developed the whole crotchometer to sort of help with, essentially.
Yeah, well, I think they live in a place where it's super rocky and they ride a lot of e-bikes, so they're constantly pedaling through rocks. So they did want to avoid that pedal strike. But I've got some conclusions already on the descent, which, well, I'll share with you in a minute.
And there, did you see how close it was? right, Anna. That was a pretty interesting day we've had, right?
Yeah, I know.
A lot of sort of numbers and processing different riding styles to sort of just run through your head, really, like with all these different crank lengths.
Yeah, I don't know downhillers do this on a regular basis, to be honest. But it's interesting putting things back to back. You really notice a difference. And obviously the last thing I tested was the 145mm cranks. And I thought they'd be ridiculous. I thought we'd be swinging the pendulum too far. And actually, I love them.
Yeah?
Like, I genuinely love them.
For what reason?
My feet were closer together and I found it was a much more powerful position to pump and jump. So it was almost like jumping like this instead of jumping like that.
Right.
I got more power out of my legs. And I found the cornering was much easier. My bike suddenly felt smaller and more agile.
Okay.
So I really liked smaller. What about you?
Yeah, I'm actually going to go to the opposite end of the scale, because I went down to a 155 from a 165, and I'd be honest, I didn't really like it. It was too small for me, and it wasn't the pedaling or seated position. It was the fact, because my legs were closer together on high speeds, especially charging down the rougher stuff, I felt less stable on the bike. Actually, that sort of spread apart platform made me feel like I was much more planted. One thing I did really like is on the climb. It was far better on the climb. I was able to pedal almost continuously up that rocky climb without striking them. Well, I pushed it pretty hard. I did catch it. I caught them once just because I wanted to see how hard I could take it. So I was almost pushing a little bit too much. But on the whole, if a 155, I could 100% see that on my e-bike or my dirt jump bike, on an e-bike especially, I think it'd be incredible. But for me, I think the sweet spot is that 160, just a little bit longer.
Yeah, and I also feel like on the short ones, I didn't have to double crank so much anymore. And that's not just for a clearance reason, it's because you had a smaller pedaling circle.
Exactly.
So your cadence is a little higher and everything just sort of worked a bit better. So I can see why e-bikers really love the shorter cranks. But this just proves why real world testing is necessary, because personal preference can't be tested in a lab, can it? Anymore. And you can't test things like handlebar whips. There's no formula to what you ride based on your height or what I ride. And I guess the same applies to cranks, doesn't it? There's no formula for it.
That's right. And that's where that relationship between 5Dev and Nico at Frameworks comes into play. 5Dev got all the incredible machinery, all the testing facilities in the world, and they can really put them through the ringer, but there's nothing like real world testing, and Nico, being a World Cup rider, can definitely do that, and vice versa. He needs things turned around really quickly or made exactly how he wants them, and they can do that. So
I envy their relationship for sure.
If you'd have told me 10 years ago I'd be using wireless electronic gears and a seat post on my mountain bike, I probably would. Where the batteries and electronic tech actually belong on the modern mountain bike. So in today's video, we're going to have a little bit of a closer look at SRAM's Access. Since the launch of the SRAM Access wireless system, many of you have asked us questions about the technology and its use on a mountain bike. And many of you as well have been concerned about it because you've probably been happier or happy just using a mechanical version of what this system would actually be replacing. So SRAM sent me a couple of mechs and a couple of controllers, and they've asked me to have a bit of a deeper dive into the technology and to show you why you shouldn't be afraid of using it. I first saw the prototypes of SRAM's Access transmission in 2018 on Nino Schurter's bike. I think it was in Stellenbosch at the World Cup. And I was completely hooked in by the capabilities and the possibilities of the system, even then at the prototype black box stage. The idea of removing cables from the bike which is just brilliant to me. You're removing the inner cable and the outer cable, and of course the inconsistencies that you get with your shifting associated with that. I mean, that in itself, as well as adding some seriously cool tech, really does appeal to me. So why would you want to go wireless and electronic in the first place? Well, it's cool, isn't it? It's minimal, there's less clutter, there's less noise, so you're removing stuff off the bars, you haven't got your cables and hoses all jostling around together like some sort of snake's wedding. It's dead easy to set up, you have perfect shifting, and you have zero inconsistencies, unlike mechanical gears, which are subject to the conditions that you ride the bike in and how you maintain it. And you can completely customize the way that you want to use it, both physically by changing the touch points on the actual paddles themselves. You can see the two different styles here. And of course, within the app, where you can change the orientation of how it changes gear, even how many gears it will change at a time. And in fact, the app's even learning how you change gears. And in future, it may even be able to make recommendations for you, especially if hooked up to things like cycle computers and other intelligent systems. Don't forget that Access is also part of a further ecosystem. You've got the Reverb wireless access seat post as well. And of course, in more modern times, we've seen the flight attendant electronic wireless suspension system as well. But I'm not here to convince you to use Access. I'm merely here to convince you why you shouldn't be afraid of using the wireless technology. Now let's address some of the concerns that many of you have about using this on your bikes. Firstly, electronics and bikes ridden in wet and muddy conditions. That's a terrible idea, surely. Well, I ride with a smartwatch, and that's waterproof. I ride, in fact, with my iPhone in my pocket, which seems to be waterproof. That's not failed yet. And also, SRAM's access system is completely waterproof. The mech itself is rated to IP69K, which is the highest standard for dust and high pressure, high temperature washing. The sort of stuff associated, in fact, with cleaning cement mixers and dump trucks. Yeah, like industrial stuff. And then you've got the actual touch point controller itself. So this is rated to IPX7, which basically means it will pass standards where they submerge it in a metre of water for 30 minutes a pop. So absolutely fine, unless of course you plan on treating a mountain bike like a jet ski. Of course, trying to prove how waterproof the battery is conjures up all sorts of weird and sometimes inappropriate test scenarios as well, like, I don't know, accidentally finding the mech in a washing machine, something like that, or perhaps even just doing the washing up, you know. But hey ho. But really, with the amount of wet weather riding I've done over the last couple of years, I shouldn't even have to talk about the waterproofness. I mean, my bikes are ridden a couple of times a week, and they're washed a couple of times a week after being ridden in wet and mud, and they're absolutely hammered with this thing as well, a couple of times a week. So much so, in fact, that I even had to replace the O-rings on this recently, because I've been using it so much. Well, if that's not enough to reassure you, then these are also dusting proof. Yeah, and he breaks everything. I mean, everything.
Uh-oh.
I did 3 days of runs on the SRAM test track, ironically, near Malaga. And for consistency, I had to run the same run every single time, which meant going through this little rocky V-shaped notch. And I tagged that rear derailleur almost every single time through there. And I was thinking, like, sooner or later, the luck's gonna run out, I'm gonna pull the thing off. But the worst thing that happened was I hit it so hard that it actually knocked me offline. And I front wheeled another rock, thinking, oh, this is it, I'm gonna go over the bars here, but whatever, I got away with it. And not once have I ever been concerned about it. I mean, really, I could just sit there and smash it to pieces with a golf club. Or skid into a massive pile of bricks. But all that's going to do is just highlight complete and utter misuse for it. This thing was solid when I bolted it on. It's still solid after all the use it's had. Look at the size of the thing. I mean, it's massive. It's designed to cope with the hits. Now, if you want to make the most of the shifting technology that this brings, then you really shouldn't be worried about the durability of it. And the last thing really to reference is battery life, because anything using a battery is obviously going to be depleting the battery as you're using it. So on the rear derailleur, you can expect to get 20 hours of changing gear, basically, with that. That's a lot of changing gear. And to be honest, the amount of times I've been riding it and I've forgotten that I've even got battery powered gear on my bikes, it's not really an issue, yeah? Then you've got the actual controller itself that uses a CR32 in there, and that will last you 2 years before you need to replace that. So really don't see that as much of an issue. It can be part of your workflow to charge after your ride. Now, to make this video, here's a good example. I charged my laptop 4 times in doing that, so depleted the battery 4 times. We used 3 batteries in that camera that's filming. I think we used 8 AA batteries in the wireless mic setup. I don't even know how many times we've had to charge and fiddle around with the coloured lights we're using in here to get a bit of ambience. The phone, charged it 3 times, and in fact, it's actually charging right now. But Access, if I open the app, is still chugging on the bike behind me that's been ridden non-stop over the last couple of weeks. So there we go. It's not really much of an issue, is it? And I actually even chucked one of these in the freezer at home just to see how the cold would basically affect it. So last night I actually bunged one of the mechs inside the freezer with my GoPro on time lapse, and well, we'll deal with that in a minute. And here's the mech, and the little light doesn't stop working, I guess, run out of battery. But let's have a look at this then. So as you can see, it is well, pretty freezing. So it's sticky to touch because the ice. There we go. And pair it. There we go. That's been in the freezer since what, 8 o'clock last night, and it's now 2:15 next day. You can see the ice on it, and it still works. So there's 3 levels available to you in the Access system. Firstly, you've got GX, which is very much the entry-level point into Access. Then you've got XO1, and then of course you've got the XX1, which is the range-topping level. Okay, so let's look at the rear mech first, and we'll start with the entry-level point, which is GX Access. So you're talking about €406 for the derailleur itself. It weighs in around 454 grams, and that's because it has the steel lower cage on there. This is obviously a bit heavier, it's a bit more basic, but actually it's quite durable. And then moving on from there, you have XO1. So this loses a significant amount of weight. It weighs 390 grams, and that's because it manages to use an alloy cage on the bottom, and you're talking about €573 for the privilege of that. And then you have the flagship XX1 race spec derailleur. So this is where the technology came in from the black box level, and it's very much a race orientated performance unit. So you've got carbon fiber lower cage here, you've got alloy plate on the inside, and you've got titanium hardware on there. As a result, it's a bit lighter at 373 grams. It's more expensive at €831, and it's only really 100 grams heavier than some mechanical derailleurs. And when it comes to the shifters or the controllers, there's actually only 2. So starting the range off is the GX offering, which you can see on my bike behind there, and that retails for €164. If you want the better finish, then what you want is the one that's shared between XO1 and XX1. Slightly different finish, slightly different band on there, €229. Okay, so the last word then. Certainly, electronic and wireless gears, they might not necessarily be for everyone, but you certainly shouldn't be afraid of the technology associated with them, and especially not in real-world mountain biking use. In my eyes, just by removing from the equation the inner gear cable and the outer gear cable, that in itself is almost enough to convince me of this stuff, because of the fact that friction equals inconsistency in gears. So it's brilliant to me. Now, it's this sort of inconsistency, this exact sort of inconsistency, that led to disc brakes becoming mass market on mountain bikes. Look at them now. You get them everywhere from entry-level price points all the way through to the top-end race bikes. But when they were first introduced, people used to laugh at disc brakes. Even our roadie friends, they're starting to get on board with this sort of stuff. But even them, with some of them, it's like they're chewing water or something. Look, it's entirely feasible that off-road group sets are going to start featuring and including more and more wireless technology as time goes on. And all I can say is it's something you definitely shouldn't be afraid of.
Now, I've long said that a mullet is fun, but a 29er is fast. And yet, I keep getting challenged on it.
Well, yeah, not being funny, you are on the shorter side, so on paper at least, running the 29-inch front wheel and the 27.5 rear wheel should be better for you, despite what you said when you started. And the opposite for me, really, 29-inch front and rear should make more sense. So today we're going to run both setups and actually see what feels better and put a clock on it and see.
So mullet is basically slang for a mixed wheel sized bike. So these days you tend to see a 29-inch wheel up front and a 27.5-inch wheel in the back. So the theory goes that you should have all of the rolling momentum and the bump eating properties of a 29er up front, and you should have all of the maneuverability and cornering properties of the smaller wheel in the rear. Hence mullet, because business in the front and party in the rear.
But we've been here before, just like anything in fashion, what goes around comes around. And the whole mullet mixed wheel setup thing has been done before. Cannondale did it in 1984 with the SM400, and I think the 300 and 500 as well. There was a whole fleet of them. They had 24-inch rear wheels, 26-inch front wheels. Then there was the Ibis Trials Comp in 1987, so they offered the bike in 20-inch front and rear, but also with a 24-inch front wheel, making that one a mullet as well. Just like the haircuts of all the riders back then too. And then in 2002 or perhaps 2003, Specialized launched the Big Hit, which was their FSR freeride bike in that blood or oxblood paint job. Gorgeous bike, I actually had one with a pair of shivers on it. That had a 24-inch rear wheel and 26, and it was really good fun until you rode it through rough stuff and you just got kicked up the arse the whole time. But still, I think one of the coolest looking bikes of all time. The list goes on. And then all the way up in 2009, just when we thought the mullet thing had disappeared along with the haircuts, Trek brought it back again with a 69er, which had a 29-inch wheel on the front and a 26 on the rear. And it was that awful brown colour. Man, that was a hounding bike. And I think Anna really liked that one. So I think she's liked her mullets for a long time.
Coming from a cross-country background, when everyone moved up to 29er, so did I, despite the fact that I'm 5'1". It was all about speed and rolling momentum back then. But now I'm into more enduro and trail, and a smaller wheel in the back definitely gives you more clearance. There's less gyroscopic effect from a smaller wheel as well, which means it's less of a fight in the corners. So naturally, a mullet should be better at descending, but I still think 29er is faster.
Unlike Anna, who is on a quest for speed, I've always been on a quest to get the bike that fits me correctly. So I'm just shy of 6'4", and over the years I've ridden everything from 20-inch, 24-inch, 26, 27.5, and then when I got to 29-inch wheels, I'd found my size. Now, it's not just about the physicalities of the big wheels and the benefits that they can offer, like rollover speed and that. The bigger thing for me was the position it enabled me to have on the bike, the geometry. So you think about your axle height, front and rear, with 29-inch wheels, they're higher off the ground. To keep your BB height in relation, your BB on a 29-inch wheel bike is actually lower than the axles by quite a way. So therefore, I felt like I was in the bike a bit more. Previously, I'd always felt like I was too high on the bike, which combined with my tall stature just felt I was never quite right on the bike. So it's always been about the feel. Of course, speed and fun come with that. Now, I am interested though to see if that smaller rear wheel, A, is more fun, and B, holds me back in terms of speed, because having that higher axle at the front and lower at the back does sound like a good fun bike to me. Okay, so can you run any bike with a mullet setup? Well, technically, I guess you could, yeah. You could run your 29-inch wheel bike, remove the rear wheel, put a 27.5-inch, and it would be a mullet. You're going to slacken your head angle doing that, and your seat angle. You're going to be putting your cranks lower to the floor so you could catch them. Your chainstays will feel longer as well. So the whole thing is not going to be as the manufacturer intended. So yes, you could do it, but no, you really shouldn't do it. So you can get bikes that are dedicated to run 29-inch front, 27.5-inch rear, and you can get bikes that you can adapt to that. Now, we've both got Orbeo rayons, and you can spec these as a mullet setup like mine is at the moment, or by changing the linkage that's supplied with the bike, you can fit a 29-inch wheel in there. So for this experiment today, we're both going to be riding the same bikes with both different setups with the same tyres. And we're going to try a couple of different trails here at the Forest of Dean, and what we're looking for is both how the bikes feel and respond on the trail to the way that we want to ride, and also how fast they are just against the clock. Now, we're also going to do this without pedalling, because obviously you could pedal harder in different places without really sort of quantifying it. So just to take that out of the equation, we're just going to be coasting for these experiments, doing it against the clock, basically just to see what wins, really. A little disclaimer though, this is just a casual experiment. We're only going to do a timed run on each setup, just so we know what our feelings are and where they actually are in terms of speed.
Right, mullet, test number 1. Just rolling. Let's go.
So start from the top just as Anna did, no pedalling whatsoever, all about massaging the terrain to get some speed. And as I found out earlier, just practicing, it seems strangely you've got to brake more to maintain your momentum.
I loved it at the top section where it's really cornery and you can do lots of pumping, but the bottom section, it was so rough, felt like I was just getting like jarred, like slowing down lots by all the rocks. But only the test will tell.
And what are you doing now?
I'm just swapping my mullet link for the 29er link on my shock. Then I'm going to pop this back in the frame and we'll be a 29er.
And nicking other people's tools while they're using them. Okay, so I'm not too sure, I'm not too sold on the looks of it. I've said this previously, I'd like the way 29ers look on a bike, they match up nicely. But one of the first things I noticed was the very top part was really flat, so you're trying to massage the terrain for any bit of speed you can. And whereas I know how I normally ride on the 29s, I'll pick up and just skip over stuff, which I know that some people say you don't need to on the 29, but that's how I like to ride. On the mullet, I found I could stick the back wheel in and actually manual, and I used to ride a lot of BMX tracks and stuff, so it kind of reminds me of riding a different style bike. I quite liked it, but I don't think there's, on this track for me, I'd be surprised if there's much difference top to bottom in terms of speed, because I'm tall, I'm heavy. With the inertia and like sort of just the speed and momentum I can get, I don't think it's rough enough to make a difference, but I do like the way mullet feels. So be interested to know though if the 29 is actually faster. About to drop in this one with the 29 front and rear. So in theory, a bit more of what I'm familiar with, but it's going to feel completely different now. So same thing applies, dropping in from the same lump. This is going to clip in and go, coast all the way through, and then repeat for the bottom section. Here we go. Okay, already it doesn't feel like it's as bothered by surface conditions, which makes sense with the bigger wheels. I cannot pump it anywhere near as well though, which is interesting because that's always the way I used to love riding.
Dropping in.
Almost had to turn up yet again, but never mind.
Yes! Oh, too much speed, too much speed.
I felt like I brake checked more through there than I did on the little wheels.
Wow! This is where it shines. All of the raster. We'll turn this around. So for me, riding the mullet first, I just really enjoyed that top section where it was really cornery and I could pump the bike so easily and pick up the front end and just corner. I just felt like a good rider on the mullet. And then I got on the 29er
You did feel
and I was like,
rider.
oh no, I just felt like I was coming into everything. Maybe I was coming into everything hot, but and then it was harder to make the corners. But it definitely felt like a fight on the 29. But the bottom section, where it was so rocky and so chattery, I was just picking up so much speed and I just felt less chattery and just more like I was going over the top.
It's interesting talking about the change of speed on stuff because it's hard to say if you're actually faster on the 29 or if the 27.5 changes direction and slows down better. Because I felt like it changed direction better, but it might have been going slower.
And exactly, so the 29er might have just been harder to corner because I was coming into everything much quicker.
Yeah, at the start of the 29er run, I just felt like this felt slow, basically. So obviously we're breaking it down into different sections, but this felt slower overall and less fun.
It did feel, yeah, I know, I completely agree with you. I felt like everything was so calm, I was a bit bored actually.
There's no way that I would run a mixed wheel size bike with any less travel than this though. Because I think the way I like to ride, the 29ers suit it, but I would be tempted to experiment a bit more actually.
I don't know, maybe
probably something rougher and rougher and longer to really tell the difference, I think, for what I like.
Well, I guess we've got to see what the numbers say.
Let's go back to studio, shall we? Ah, well, look at that, I managed to get changed as well.
Oh,
that was pretty good,
nice
isn't it?
jersey.
Okay, so I have got the results here. On a bit of paper, I've scribbled these down and I've got all the video clips here as well. Right, now I want to know what your predictions are first.
I want to be proved wrong, but I don't want to be proved wrong either.
So originally, I thought that you would be quicker on a mullet, but you always thought you were quicker on 29, is that right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, and your theory on that?
Bigger wheels, big bump eating power. They also just roll. You know, I've come from cross country where I used to race, and when everyone moved up to 29ers, they were just unbelievably quicker. And as soon as I did, I was unbelievably quicker. So why wouldn't that make a difference in Enduro too?
Okay, so depending on what the outcome is, are you gonna continue playing with the mullet bikes because I could fun, or are you gonna just stick with your 29s?
I have been riding a mullet since, well, for probably about the last 8 months, and I've been absolutely loving my Mega. So that may sway things a bit. I've been enjoying it too much to go back.
All right, I've got to tell you. All right, so let's call it one track, but technically it was 2 tracks for different styles of testing, and we'll just say upper and lower for argument's sake.
Like a dream track.
Yeah, so the top half was a bit flatter, needed a lot of pumping and stuff, but then there was still like some roots and things that you could really stall on. Right, so on the upper track, on the mullet bike, right, you were 129, right, and then on the lower track, you were 108, which was a different style track. It was a bit faster, a bit rougher, but then sort of flattened out with the jumps at the bottom. On the 29, you were 131 at the top. So you were 2 seconds faster on the mullet at the top.
I can believe that. I can believe it. It was cornery. It was very cornery.
And your time on the bottom was exactly the same, 108.
Exactly the same.
Yeah.
As
So
each
you
other.
were 2 seconds faster.
No.
Yeah.
How can they be the same?
We've got it on video, and I went through this because we didn't use an official timing system, so obviously take this with a pinch of salt.
Yeah.
But I started at the exact same points and I finished in the exact same points for both the runs. You pause it on video at the exact points, and that's the timing I got for those.
But it's funny though, because like I took such weird lines with the 29er and I kept overcooking things and I felt like I was coming in hot and braking. So I don't know.
So
I thought
I wonder.
I thought it felt faster, but I felt like I mucked up a lot more.
I'm wondering, like, so you're so used to riding 29, the whole time I was seeing you ride, you've been on 29, so it's just part of the way you ride. But I wonder if there is part of that might actually hinder you without you even realising it.
Possibly.
Maybe you do move around more than you think, which is why you might have been quicker on
I
the
think,
other bike.
to be honest, I had a little think about this over the weekend, and I think I moved around less on the 29er. I feel like I've been getting a better rider from riding the mullet over the last 8 months.
Yeah.
And I love it so much, and I'm moving around so much more on it that when I got back on the 29er that day, I was like, oh, it's weird.
Felt weird.
It's a fight, and I was coming in too hot and not moving it quick enough. So I feel like I'm wrong. I've been proved wrong that 29 isn't faster in this situation.
Yeah, of course. This is obviously just a random test just to try it.
But I feel like in the hands of someone stronger and more capable and maybe more comfortable with the 29er, probably would have been quicker. I reckon if I'd have given another couple of goes on that run on the 29er, it would have been quicker.
Okay, so right, let's move on.
That's my feeling anyway.
No, this is all
What about
good.
you? What about you? Come on then.
I love 29, and like I said to you at the beginning of the video, it's nothing to do with outright speed, it's the position and how I feel on the bike that makes me love them. But that said, the first riding we did was on the 27.5 rear, so on the mullet setup. And as soon as I got on it, I really liked it.
You loved it.
I really liked it.
You were buzzing when you
Well, the thing I loved
finished.
about it was because I used to like ride loads of BMX tracks and that. I used to love manuing through stuff. As soon as I got on the 27.5, I was like, oh my God, I can like really work the bike into terrain. And I was dead sure I was quicker on it, but I wasn't. I was a second quicker on the top on 29, and I'd have sworn blind that I was slower on the 29. Because to start with, I didn't feel the bumps and that, and then as soon as we went to, there's some roots and it flattened off and then sort of went down sort of whoopy bit. As soon as I got to that, I couldn't pump anything. It was just a case of going over it, and I was like, oh, that's it, like the mullet is definitely quicker, but it wasn't. The lower section, I did think the 29 would have been faster, but it felt slower. But it was quicker, a second quicker on low as well. So I was 2 seconds quicker, but like a second on both. You were 2 seconds quicker on the top.
I mean, it doesn't sound like much, but if you won a downhill race by 2 seconds, you're easily outside the top 5.
Yeah,
like the
and
difference
also
between winner and
it doesn't sound much on like a 2.5 minute run. But if you actually if you watch someone ride past and you count 2 seconds, it's actually quite a long way.
It is quite a lot.
Quite a surprising way, yeah.
Percentage-wise, 2 seconds on a 3-minute track, or.
But as I said to you, the 29 thing's never been about speed. So do you know what I've done to my bike at home? I've put it back to mullet.
Have you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because I just thought, I'm not going to do it. I've got a new Spectral 125, which is 29 front and rear, and it belongs like that. It's a fun bike. But I just thought, I don't ride a big travel bike that often. And all right, so if I was going to the Alps or something, I'd definitely stick with the big wheels front and rear. But I just say, actually, I want to ride it more with mullet because it just felt wicked fun.
It is a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
Yeah, I loved it. So I'm temporarily converted the wrong way. Who'd have thought it?
And me too. I mean, I'm still sticking by my phrase that mullet is fun for obvious reason.
Yeah.
And 29 is fast. I think in the right hands, 29er is fast. Whether that be someone who's taller, and can manipulate it more. Maybe it's that they're more experienced or stronger physically and then they can do that. I think in the right hands it is. What do you think?
Yeah, I
Do you
mean,
agree?
if you're a racer and you're chasing seconds, you're going to go with whatever the fastest is for however you ride. And like we mentioned at the beginning of the video, downhill racers, a lot of them are picking the smaller back wheel because they're moving around so much.
Yeah.
And if it helps you move around, you're going to be quicker. Whereas the 29s, they work for me fine, but definitely I'm going to stick with a silly little wheel on the back of this bike for a bit, because I mean, it kind of looks, at the beginning I thought it looked horrible, if I'm honest.
It
And I
looks
said to you, but
badass.
actually it
I
looks
think
pretty
it's
cool.
lovely.
Yeah. In today's video, we are going to be comparing chain versus chainless. Yep, you might have seen some similar videos before, but we're working with Suspension Doctor. As you can see, I've got a bit of a special setup on the bike here, and we're looking at some hard data in exactly what is going on with the suspension on the bike. The chain versus chainless saga has been going on for years. We've seen chainless downhill races, Whistler's had its Fat Wednesdays, and we've even seen Aaron Gwynn and Nico Mullally have great success when they've managed to lose a chain on a downhill race. But what we've not really looked into is what is exactly going on the bike itself. How does this affect the suspension? Now, we know you get chain growth and we know that you're going to get pedal kickback from the chain, but there's also other factors to take into account. So just consider, if your chain breaks and you're on a downhill run, you think what a feat it is to do a good run. Despite how good the suspension's working, you put pressure on the chain the whole time when you're coming out of turns, even if you're not pedaling. You're also not considering that if you accidentally pedal, you're going to go over the bars. There's lots of different things to consider. The braking, of course. If you over brake when you haven't got a chain on there, you're not going to regain that speed. That said, if you did the opposite and you under braked going into something, you might carry too much speed and fluff the corner. So the aim of today then really is to see exactly what's going on with the suspension. So we've got a telemetry system on here, courtesy of Suspension Doctor. And really what we're going to do is we're going to do a series of runs with a chain, and I'm not going to be pedaling anywhere, and a series of runs without the chain, but as you can see, removing the cassette and the rear mech off the bike as well. The focus is to find out what is going on with the suspension, certainly from Suspension Doctor's perspective, and mine is to find out what's going on, the way that you ride, the way that you approach the trail, because there's going to be some different stuff going on and some stuff that's going to, well, hopefully correlate. Let's get to the bottom of it, shall we? Chain versus chainless. Now this is just to learn the run, which I just got wrong on the first go. So hopefully I'll see where I'm going this time. Okay, this is it. Okay, I think I might be able to figure out where I'm going for the next run. Okay, another run. Let's I kind of found my way, but there's definitely two sections where it's super easy to get lost. Let's see what happens. No pedaling now. Come on, give me some backsides. There's one. More no pedaling. no. Doing a snail's pace. Okay, so what we're trying to look for in a video is just how much difference the suspension makes when you're looking at chain versus chainless. Now, obviously you want to take as much weight off the back of the bike as possible, so taking the chain off, taking the rear mech off, and now taking the cassette off, although I've forgotten the chain whip at the hotel, so having to be creative here with how we do it. It seems to be working, holding the cassette in place, enabling me to undo it. And I've got to slip these cable ties. Chainless now, super interesting. Removed all unnecessary unsprung mass. Just trying to basically change how the bike feels. No cassette, no chain, no rear derailleur, and trying to consistently run on the same trail. So here we go. Do not overbrake, do not overbrake. Okay, we are on chainless run. So I'll tell you what, that has been a really interesting few days testing. So I spent all afternoon today doing runs on this lower downhill track with no chain on. And to start with, it was terrifying because I was afraid of pedaling. You know, you rely on your pedal tension a lot more than I ever anticipated. So now, at the end of the day testing, I've got the chain back on and I'm just going to do a run down and see what difference it makes to the feel of the bike. I mean, it's going to be noisier, there's going to be more stuff going on. Let's see how different it feels. Oh my God, actually is a noticeable difference. But I've got to say, I have got more confidence through sections like that. That makes a big difference. It messes with your head doing this sort of riding, it really does. Wow, tell you what a difference between the two setups. It's quite unbelievable actually. Really interesting day out on the mountain there, riding chain and chainless setups. So I started by using a chain, then I went to chainless, and then went back to chain again, so I could kind of verify my thoughts on what was going on. So running the chain on that particular track, there's 3 or 4 sort of choices through rock garden. Nothing crazy going on, but there's definitely a few holes that you can lose speed on if you hit the bigger ones. So I started thinking about how I might approach it with the chain removed from the bike a bit later on. Now, when I removed the chain from the bike, actually it was quite a lot different to what I expected. So I felt quite exposed to start with, because I think subconsciously, without realising it with a chain, I'm probably leaning on that chain quite a lot for support. And as soon as it's not there, you've really got to think about what you're doing with your foot position. I think it's a good thing, because it made me think differently about the way I ride. But the lack of support you get from the chain is a really strange sensation to get your head round. And it really made me wonder how on earth people like Aaron Gwynn and Nico Mullally just carried on in their runs without a chain. Like, it's just mind blowing they did that. But as I sort of learnt the feeling of the bike, I think a couple of things became clear. I could really hear what the bike was doing, because there's no chain slapping around, no mech or anything. So I could literally hear the level of traction I had on the tyres by the noises they're making on the rock and on the sand and stuff. And it was completely silent, which is just the weirdest feeling when you're riding through rough terrain and the bike's making no noise. You can hear your suspension units like returning as a rebound sort of cycles, and that's literally about it. And then braking. So I didn't want to brake because I didn't want to lose my speed and then be going 0 miles an hour sort of thing. But also I think I probably rode a bit smarter. So there's a few particular things. There's a gully that was really bothering me, because as I drop into the gully at the end of it, I was losing speed by sliding. But I don't think I even considered it with the chain on. But with the chain off, I was braking going into it, probably going through it quite a bit slower, but then maintaining my speed and rolling out quicker, and looking down the trail further. So I think I rode, at least in my head, I rode a lot differently to what I think I would with the chain. And then jumping back with a chain at the end, I think I rode the trail better for it. I think it sort of taught me a few things about my riding, looking further ahead than I ever had, and learning to really sort of coax speed from the terrain. I'd love to know what was actually going on with the suspension, because it felt great both ways, to be fair, but there was definitely something going on. I felt like the bike felt more active, or I was using more travel. I don't know.
Pretty much what you've just said, yeah. So over, it was like a 2-minute track.
Yep.
We were looking at 38 metres of total vertical travel. That's like compression and rebound, so that's how much your axle's moved up and down.
Okay, well, through the whole track, so 38 metres worth of travel.
Yeah, so
okay, that's cool.
Your axle moved 38 metres. The chainless was consistently about a metre more movement, so a metre more
a whole
active.
metre more travel over the duration of the track.
Over compression and rebound, so it was quite a lot. I didn't expect it to be that much, to be honest.
Yeah, considering how short the track is, that's a lot of additional. So essentially, it's helping me use my travel more effectively on the bike.
Yeah. So your compression speeds are slightly up, average. Your max compression speeds are slightly up. Your max rebound speeds are up. Your average rebound speeds are up slightly.
Yep.
So it's just that little bit more active over the terrain.
It kind of verifies what I thought about the bike being more active. Quite surprised by the fact you use like a metre more suspension travel over the length of the track. We've probably got some stats to see how long the actual track is. I haven't measured it, but yeah, around 2 minutes, I think we said.
I think it was about consistently between 154, 153.
Okay.
I think fastest to slowest was about 2 seconds difference, so it was pretty consistent. That was chain and chainless, they were all pretty consistent.
So basically the suspension is definitely working differently and working a little bit better. But I wonder, because obviously the suspension designers of various different bikes, they build in an amount of, I don't know, like anti-squat and stuff like that to make a bike handle away. I didn't see a negative response to the way the bike was riding with the chain. It felt great, but it was just a little bit different without the chain.
Yeah, so, it wasn't a huge difference on over that sort of 38 metres.
Yeah, so like I was saying, I think I was riding probably better on the bike with no chain, but I think I preferred riding the bike with the chain because I like to lean on the chain tension. I think you do need that.
Braking was very interesting as well, so the total braking over the runs was consistently the same.
Okay.
On the front, and it was you were 10 seconds, consistently 10 seconds less on the rear brake. Were chainless, so you weren't dragging. You were
so I'm conscious of
you're conscious of not dragging and carrying speed.
Yeah.
So yeah, you've been wary of over braking and you keep off that back brake to carry speed.
God, I wouldn't have said that. I would have said I was probably braking more. Yeah.
So you're probably braking more effectively, like braking harder when you were going faster and then getting off the brakes to carry that speed through.
Yeah.
And we measured single brake events as well.
Okay.
So it tells you the longest single brake event.
Yep.
And on every run, you were on average 2 seconds less, like consistently 2 seconds less on the front brake and 4 seconds less on the rear on a longest brake. So you must have had a kind of a fast section where you were braking heavy, but on the chainless you were braking later, probably heavier to slow down and carrying more speed.
Carrying speed, yeah.
And you actually had consistently higher max speeds with chainless as well.
With chainless?
So you were obviously coming out of somewhere and carrying more speed down the fastest point, and that's probably where you.
I would not have said that.
It's quite interesting to find out. Yeah. I thought it would have been like longer on the brakes and a bit more cautious.
I'm quite surprised. I don't really have a response for that. Yeah, that's really cool. But I guess still though, the point is it's quite a subtle difference on this bike between the two. But it makes me really interested what it's like on a bike that's got either loads of kickback or a big travel bike. So you think those downhill bikes, it must make a massive difference with the amount of movement they have. Fascinating stuff. So we know that the chainless bike technically made me ride a bit better and arguably a bit quicker, in theory, which I didn't see that one coming actually, given how much I like the bike as it is. And I would still ride it as it is, but I've got to say, I'm probably going to ride chainless again here and there for the fun. I think it's definitely something to experiment with. I need to find a bike now that's got loads of kickback on it so I can try the same experiment again just to see just how different it is on the trail. But is anyone out there riding chainless? I'd love to know what your thoughts are. I've been fascinated by some of this information and quite surprised.
So let's talk about stanchion diameters, because so often other riders tell me that as a light rider I should be on lighter forks and that 38mm is way too stiff for me. Yet Connor here is expected to find the limits of a lighter fork. So this got me thinking, do we need to be sizing up or down according to our weight? And how do we know if we're too light or too heavy for our forks? Well, SR Suntour have provided us with 3 different stanchion widths to find out. Challenge this belief, both myself and Connor, who are arguably at the opposite ends of the weight and height spectrum, will be riding the same fork, all set up to 160mm of travel, but each having a different stanchion diameter. So we have the Uron, which is 35mm, the Duralux 36, which has 36mm, and the Duralux 38, which has, you guessed it, 38mm. To make this challenge as fair as possible, both myself and Connor will be riding a nuke-proof Scout in our respective sizes, and we'll be setting up our suspension according to Suntour's recommended settings for air pressure, compression and rebound, so that the performance is relatively similar regardless of our weight. All 3 of these forks are intended for trail and enduro purposes. They all have similar axle to crown lengths, they're all air sprung, and they all have magnesium lowers. This is Connor Ryan, our very own production manager. He is 117 kilograms, he is 6'4" tall, his strengths include breaking bike parts, and his weakness is beer. And at the other end of the scale is your tech presenter, me, Anna Chipulo. And at my heaviest, I weigh 61 kilos. I'm 5 foot 1 inches tall. My strengths include laughing loudly and getting good life out of my components. And my weaknesses, I guess, is chocolate. Starting off with the Oron with the 35mm stanchions, we're here at a typical trail with rocks, roots and corners to put it through its paces. So let's get riding. 3, 2, 1, go! The Oron has an aluminium forged crown and it's offered in travel lengths from 130 to 160 millimeters of travel. The weight is 2,140 grams. The Duralux 36 has direct mount for 180 millimeter rotors, is offered in travels from 150 to 170 millimeters, and it has the option of hollow forged or solid forged crowns, and our model weighs 2,270 grams. The Duralux 38 has the stiffer hollow forged crown, direct post mount for 203mm rotors, and is offered in travels from 160 to 180mm, and the weight of our model is 2,480 grams. While the differences may seem subtle, it really shows the scale of intentions and preferences available to a rider, even in one genre. SR Suntour have been producing suspension since 1995, and at that time, stanchion diameter was typically 28 to 32 millimeters. Now, this width grew over time to keep up with the demand for rougher trails and longer travel. Today, trail forks tend to have 34 to 38 millimeter stanchions. The wider the stanchions, the stiffer the chassis to support longer travel, but also it will be much more control for aggressive riders and aggressive terrain. However, with the wider stanchions, you do get more material and a heavier weight, so some riders might prefer a lighter fork. Interestingly, all 3 of these forks have won the Mega Avalanche at some point in time. We've had a good day's riding and we're actually losing light now. So let's head back to the studio and talk about the results. So we're back in the studio, all a bit more warmed up. And well, Connor, what did you think about the different stanchion diameters? Did you feel the difference?
Yeah, you definitely could feel it a little bit. I think for me, it wasn't like a crazy difference, but you could feel on the real rough stuff, and I found under braking, the smaller fork was a little bit more harder to control, whereas the big one was just felt solid all the time. I think the 36 was kind of the perfect middle ground. So there is that choice. I think for me personally, like the weight wasn't an issue, being bigger, like lifting the weight or pedaling the weight up the hill has never been an issue for me. I've always put extra things on my bike to make it burlier. I run heavier tires, so because you kind of have that extra power being bigger, that it you don't get the punishment that like a smaller person would.
Yeah.
So that's why maybe you would lean towards 38. You may as well have it. The weight, like I never felt the weight mattered to me when we were riding them.
No, yeah, I didn't think I would notice the weight differences at all, but when you ride them back to back, it was quite noticeable. When I put the Aura in the 35 millimeters, it was just a little bit lighter in that it just felt a lot easier to pick up the front end and sort of pop the front end and play a little. Whereas the Duralux, the 38s, were a bit heavier, so it didn't feel as easy, but it was still doable. But then with the 35s, like you said about control, I did feel like occasionally in really rough stuff, it would go offline a little bit. Whereas in the Duralux, the 38s, you could just draw a straight line, like straight through it, and it would just go through.
I think the smaller the fork, the more you were probably punished for your riding mistakes.
Yeah.
Whereas the bigger one, you could get away with a little bit more.
Yeah, but then the 38s, I feel, would be quite stiff, heavy, and fatiguing if it was like an all-day ride, and I'd rather have the 35s.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if I probably wouldn't complain about either if they were on my bike, but doing them back to back really showed that sort of subtle difference. But now that you know and you've seen those differences, would you always go for a 38, for example, because of your weight or your height or your riding?
I didn't feel like it was like I needed to. Like I was heavier, so I needed that. Like both the smaller forks felt capable enough. But I would say it's like back to that, I didn't feel the punishment of the extra weight, so why not?
Yeah.
Get that extra confidence. I don't think the weight, my rider's weight, made a difference to all of them. They all like worked well.
Yeah.
Again, the lighter one, you probably were punished a bit more for your mistakes, but that's riding.
Yeah, I mean, as a light rider, I don't feel like I should be on a 36 for a trail and enduro or less, for example.
Yeah.
I was really comfortable on the 38s. At no point did I think they were too stiff. So, but they came into their own in the right territory, like when it got really rough. The rider weight isn't the big aspect on your choice of stanchion.
The type of riding I do is probably like enduro-y laps of rough trails, so I would go for either the 36 or 38 personally. But if I was riding a long day out, XC, the 35 would be ideal. So it's just that choice depending on what type of riding you're doing.
Yeah, I totally agree. When it comes to, say, a thicker stanchion diameter, it's great for riders who are putting a lot of stress on their equipment. Now, this could be rider weight, or it could be just down to their style of riding or the terrain that they're choosing to ride. Many of you viewers tell me you haven't moved on to 12-speed and you don't need it. And then Nukeproof sent me a brand new Scout with Shimano Dior 10-speed on it. And it got me thinking, is 10-speed so bad? Do we really need 12 gears? SRAM brought out the Eagle drivetrain back in 2016, and they promptly declared the death of the front derailleur because it offered 500% gear range, which was comparable to most 2x systems at the time. Then Shimano brought out their microspline freehub bodies, which allowed you to put a tiny 10-tooth cog on the cassette, and that gave you 510% range. And then SRAM came back out with this, the 10 to 52 tooth cassette, which offered you 520% gear range. And more is better, isn't it? Well, let's dive a little deeper into that. So to work out the gear range of your cassette, you need to take the biggest gear, which is a 52 on here, divide it by the smallest gear, which is a 10, and then times it by 100 to represent it as a percentage. So for this, it's 520%. Now on my 10-speed over here, I've got a 48 tooth, divide that by the 11 and times it by 100, that gives me 436%. Well, that sounds rubbish in comparison to this. gears, right? Well, I mean, that percentage doesn't really tell us anything about what's going on between the biggest and the smallest ring. It doesn't tell us how many gears we've got, and it doesn't tell us about the increments in which you have to get to those higher gears. So I think what we've become used to is seeing that bigger percentage and thinking, well, that bigger percentage means we get that easier gear. But if the easier gear is all we care about, well, that means we should be talking about gear ratios. So let's dive into what that really means. Gear ratios are ratios because they take into account the second cog and show the relationship between the two. So if you were in a 30 tooth at the front and a 10 tooth at the back, then you have a 30 to 10 gear ratio. So as the 10 is 3 times smaller than the 30, we know that that little cog at the rear will rotate 3 times in the time it takes to make 1 pedal revolution at the front. So as the cogs turn the back at the rear wheel, we know that the smaller cogs on the back cover more distance, but they will feel harder. Bigger cogs will take longer to rotate with 1 pedal revolution, so we know they cover less distance, but they also feel easier. But we can also turn these gear ratios into decimals. So a 30 divided by 10 is 3, meaning the cog will turn 3 times with 1 pedal revolution, and 3 is quite high for a gear ratio. 1 or lower is a nicer climbing gear, obviously depending on how powerful you are or how heavy your bike is, but it gives you good cadence. If we were to plot all of these decimals onto a table, we can quickly look over the crossovers. So we can see that a 30 tooth front chainring with a whopping 52 tooth at the back achieves the same gear ratio as a 28 tooth at the front with a 48 tooth at the back. This means it will travel the same distance and it will feel the same easiness as that fancy 12-speed Eagle's easiest gear. So gear ratios tell me that I can match this nice, easy Eagle gear here, and all I have to do is swap this cassette from a 46 tooth to a 48 tooth cassette, and I need to swap my front chainring from a 30 to a 28. The problem is that Shimano don't actually make 28 tooth chainrings anymore, and they're really hard to find, and they won't actually fit on a Shimano crank set either, so I would have to find some alternative cranks. And well, I've kind of gone halfway to replacing the entire drivetrain at this stage by doing that. Now there is actually a third cog in this scenario, and that is your wheel. So if you were to have a smaller wheel, you would cover less distance, but as we know already, that feels easier. So you could make it slightly easier with smaller wheels, and maybe that's why you retro nerds out there love the 10 speed still, especially if you're on 26-inch wheels. But that also explains why we needed the SRAM Eagle drivetrain in the first place, because we're all now obsessed with the bigger wheels like the 29er. And now, if you want to get super nerdy, now you can go to Sheldon Brown's gear calculator. I'll leave the link on the screen, and that will allow you to start working out those 2 gears and the wheel size, and it even takes into account the crank lengths as well. Now there's actually a bigger problem here than just the availability of small chain rings. If you had a chain ring that is too small, your chain might actually rub on the frame, because bikes these days are optimized for bigger front chain rings. In fact, if you have a full suspension bike, a smaller chain ring might actually affect the performance of your rear suspension. Huh? So when we see these anti-squat numbers, it will be with a particular gearing in mind, because chain ring size will affect the anti-squat. A larger front chainring may be more resistant to suspension compression when pedaling, which makes them more efficient climbers, but this can lead to a firmer suspension feel. Small chainrings have a less taut chain, effectively, so less chance of pedal kickback for sure, and a nice active rear suspension feel, but too much and it'll just bob under pedaling up the climbs. Ugh, my head hurts. Should we just wrap this up and get to the conclusion? As I've explained, with a 10-speed drivetrain, you get those 10 gears somewhere in the middle of a 12-speed cassette, which means that you lose out on that easy gear for climbing up hills, and you miss out on that bottom gear that's nice and fast and efficient. But if that's not a problem to you, then you will afford a drivetrain that's almost half the cost of a 12-speed drivetrain. In fact, if we look at this cassette alone, a Shimano Dior 10-speed cassette costs around about £35 here in the UK, and a Shimano Dior 12-speed costs around about £95. So even replacing parts will be a lot more affordable. So if you don't need the easier gear and you don't need the harder gear, then no, you don't need 12-speed. But 12-speed does afford us some better gear range. So we can go from hill spin to fire road sprint in just one cassette, which is great. Are you that person who always locks out their forks on the XC climbs? Or are you that person who always uses pro pedal on the enduro climbs? Or perhaps you're that person who has suspension with neither of those functions and you're wondering if you're missing out on some gains. Well, whatever your relationship is with lockout, I'm going to explore what it is, what the pros and cons are, and I've got a few challenges for myself to figure out if I even need it at all. Suspension lockout is, as the name would suggest, a way of locking out your suspension, although sometimes it's just limiting the movement of the suspension. Now, you can have a lever on the forks or the shock itself, or you might even have a lever on your handlebars to actuate this. But basically, it will either limit or completely prevent the suspension from moving. And this can be used on smooth surfaces, on climbs, or in sprints to make the bike feel more rigid and therefore hold more energy for yourself rather than transferring it into the movement of the suspension. Different suspension will operate a lockout in different ways. If you have a lever like I do here on the RockShox SID, when engaged, it'll operate a valve or a mechanism in order to close off the oil flow or perhaps close off the airflow inside the fork in order to stop movement completely so that it gives a nice rigid feel. Some mechanisms are only partial lockout rather than full lockout, which means that you will get some compression and rebound rather than a completely rigid feel. We often find this on rear shocks or rear suspension in the form of a lever. Now, this lever could just say firm, like I have here. It could be a three-way, and sometimes it's referred to as pro pedal mode, as it gives you a firmer feel but not completely locked out, which will offer a little more efficiency on those long climbs up back to a descent. Think of this as a kind of quick way of adding a load of compression damping on just to give you a firmer feel. But lockout isn't just for XC. Recently, we've seen an uptake in lockout and partial lockout for enduro bikes. Even brands like Scott have just released their Genius with a front and rear lockout lever. Companies like RockShox have released the Flight Attendant, which is technology that automatically engages that partial lockout on the climbs and then will disengage automatically on the descents. Well, that's all well and good in theory, but how does this affect my riding? Is it a worthy piece of tech that I should have on all of my bikes? Let's find out. So for my first challenge, I want to see if the partial lockout actually makes any difference to my enduro bike for what looks like a typical enduro fire road climb. So first, without the firm mode, and I'm going to keep my heart rate in zone 2, and then I'm going to pop it into firm mode and see if that gets me up the hill any quicker. Well, let's go, I guess. Well done. Yeah, I'd say that's short, but a pretty typical enduro climb for me. And usually I would run that without the firm mode because, well, it's just a bit more comfortable. But, well, let's see what I'm missing out on with firm mode engaged. Right, I'm in the same spot, same gear, firm mode engaged. Let's see if I'm any quicker. Okay, well, I definitely feel a difference. There's a lot more buzz through the saddle, but whether it's any quicker or not, I don't know. I guess we'll have to look at the results. So the results for that section, the enduro bike without firm mode engage, it took me 4 minutes and 20 seconds to get to the top. And then with firm mode engaged, it took me 4 minutes and 12 seconds to get to the top. So I actually saved 8 seconds. Now, I know what you're thinking. You probably don't care about saving seconds and time up a fire road climb if you're just enjoying a ride. But that is free speed, effectively. You could ride the same speed at less effort, and maybe less effort is important to you. So proof that I think firm mode does actually help. But well, let's see what it does on the XC bike. Okay, for my next challenge, I want to do it on the XC bike, and I want a longish climb. I'm doing it on tarmac so that I get rid of any variables of tech that might affect the results. And I'm going to be sat down as well, because I think that's realistic over a long climb, but I will do an out of the saddle test next. So anyway, let's get going, shall we? First up, with suspension not locked out. Let's go. Well, there we go. Long XC climb without lockout. And you know, sometimes I would put my weight quite far forward and sort of bounce, and you can feel the suspension bouncing, but whether that makes a difference to my pedaling or not, I don't know. Better catch my breath and do a locked out version. Okay, time for a seated long climb on the XC bike. This time locked out, solid, feels like a rigid bike now. Right, let's get to it. Ooh, well, I felt more powerful, but perhaps that was placebo. I don't know. I didn't feel faster, I just felt powerful. Let's check out the results and see for sure. So the times without the lockout engaged as normal, it was 3 minutes and 34 seconds. And then with the lockout engaged, it was 3 minutes and 32 seconds. So I saved a whopping 2 seconds, which doesn't sound like much, but hey, seconds count when it comes to XC racing. And I'm surprised it was quicker because I actually felt quite tired on that second run, and it was my 4th timed climb of the day as well, and yet I was still faster. So I'm usually quite lazy with using the lockout, but I think in my next XC race I will actually be using it. But anyway, I think we know the results of the next challenge, the sprint, but well, let's find out. So this is the sprinting challenge, and for this I wanted to mimic that finish line sprint in an XC race. So I've got about a 500-foot course here. It's pretty flat, no undulations, very short, a bit gravelly with one corner in it, but I think this looks pretty typical as a finish line sprint. So I want to know whether that lockout is going to make a difference. Well, only one way to find out. Right, sprinting, not locked out. Let's go. Oh, 2 gears. Okay, right. Last time I think I used a gear slightly too hard, but to make things fair, I'll stay in the same gear. And let's see, lockout engaged, and let's go. So the XC sprint, that was interesting. I felt more powerful with the lockout engaged. A little bit of interest is around the corner where it was a little bit loose and gravelly. I felt the bike wanted to wash out with the lockout not engaged, but it didn't. I just thought it was gonna. I think that was just me sinking into the suspension. But when I had the lockout engaged, I actually did step out a little bit. And my tyres drifted a slight. So, I mean, it's a good reminder that suspension does keep traction. But the most interesting part of this is not how I expected it to go, is that the times were exactly the same. So I didn't believe that this was right, so I actually did the test twice. The first time I got 19 seconds with and without the lockout, and the second time I did it, 20 seconds both with and without the lockout. So yeah, I guess that concluded that maybe when you're going max effort and sprinting, and maybe when you're on the flat, then a lockout really doesn't add that much. But as you've seen from the results on the climbs, it does make a difference there. Me and Doddy have recently been debating the difference between old school and mid school. Mid school being that sweet spot between retro and modern. I'm thinking late 2000s, early 2010s. But it got me thinking, has there really been enough change in the last decade, in the last 10 or so years, for us to classify that whole entire era with its own category? Well, I'm going to take you back in time and find out for myself. Whoa, what the heck am I wearing so much white for an off-road trail ride? Shimano DXs, pretty cool, but seriously heavy. And who stole my socks? Why are they so short? Backpack, camelback, of course, for all the sandwiches on my bike ride, and 2 litres of water. Obviously, 2 bottles isn't enough. Yeah, so 2010s. I think it was a time when in downhill, Greg Minnaar and G. Atherton reigned supreme. Julian Absalon was on his winning streak in the cross-country World Cup. And when it come to bikes, there was cross-country, there was downhill. Enduro didn't really exist as a bike category. We had all mountain, and that was everything from trail to free ride, apparently. And this is one of those bikes. So So this is my GT Aggressor circa 2010, maybe 2009. And you know what? The tech wasn't so bad back then. We've got disc brakes instead of V brakes. We've still got triple chain rings here, but this is a 3x9. Aluminium is reasonably lightweight. We've got some decent forks up the front here with the Marzocchi bombers. You know, things aren't that bad. But hey, let's dive into some deeper detail about the components and the geometry to see how things have really changed over the last decade. Yeah, that old bit of tack can stay in the 2010s for all I care, because we've got it so good right now. Even if we look at an aluminium hardtail for trail, things have really changed in the last 10 years. Geometry, components, suspension is amazing. Wheel sizes and widths have changed for the better, in my opinion. And I'm going to dive into each of those in more detail now to show you how it's really changed. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more content like this in the future. Now, mid-school bikes were all about those 26s and apparently coloured rims as well. But 29er was present in the 2010s, but they were more a kind of genre of their own for people who wanted to roll over roots and rocks, as if 26s weren't capable of doing that. But 2017 was when we started to see 29ers becoming more commonplace, even in the world of cross country. Now I've got 27.5 here, and this is considered a more playful size, I would say, but 29er is more common in your trail bikes these days. Also, I'm running 2.2 inches on the GT Aggressor over here, pretty commonplace back then. But I don't think a modern trail bike would start on anything less than 2.4 inches these days. I'm actually running 2.6s at the higher end of the tyre width. And as a result, our wheel rims have become much wider to accommodate more tyre widths as well. Back in the mid-century, we seemed to measure our suspension in inches rather than millimeters, which we do now. I've got a whopping 5 inches of travel on my Marzocchi bombers here, which was actually 130 mil-ish. Now 130 mil is pretty good for trail these days, so I wouldn't say suspension length has changed that much. However, it's not unsurprising to see 160 or even 170 on a trail bike these days, even if you're not doing super aggressive enduro downhilly riding. I would say that obviously technology has changed quite a bit in suspension. Damping technology has really progressed in the last 10 years, and it makes the old bombers, sorry to say, feel a little bit like pogo sticks, I've got to say. But just that small upgrade in technology, in the dampers, for example, of a set of forks from 10 years ago versus now, means that our riding style has completely changed. This bike feels more like a cross-country bike for bridleways nowadays compared to this bike, which is still an aluminium hardtail, but Blake has ridden this bike in the Mega Avalanche. I mean, that is downhill territory. So suspension has brought our riding along as well. So Aggressor by name, Aggressor by nature. Back in the day, this bike was considered an aggressive trail bike. It was considered a bit racy, and it was described as long and roomy. Now, this is a medium bike, and my Scout is a small. And yet, that is a couple of mil longer in the chainstay, 29 millimeters longer in the top tube. The overall wheelbase is 108 mils longer than this medium trail bike from the 2010s. You know, we talk a lot about bikes getting longer, slacker and lower these days, and we moan, I guess, about the small changes. But when you look over the space of a decade, those are big changes. They have definitely got longer. And we've even got a 55 millimeter extra standover clearance. Look how much lower this top tube is to this. And for me, I hate to use the word game changer, but that really has been the game changer. Being able to step down easily with confidence, having a bike long enough and roomy enough to tackle technical terrain means that this has really brought on my riding, and I think our riding as a whole over the last decade. Now, I know I'm comparing two different brands here, but the GT Aggressor had a 71-degree head angle, which I would say is pretty commonplace for cross-country trail bike back in the day. And the Nuke-Proof Scout has a 65-degree head angle. A little aggressive, but not out of the ordinary. That's a 6-degree difference. I mean, I think 2010's me would look at this bike and think it was a downhill hardtail. But interestingly, the seat tube angle has actually got steeper. So this is 1 degree steeper on the Nuke-Proof Scout. And I think those angles in both the seat tube and the head tube angle is indicative of our style of riding and what we want to do in our trail riding these days. I think trail riding has fast become more of a winch and plummet style of riding, which means you need a steep seat angle to winch up those steep fire roads, and then you need a slack head angle so that you can tackle more aggressive, steeper technical descents, more so than what I was probably doing in the 2010s, which is probably a bit more like cross-country marathon these days. One of the biggest differences between the mid school and the new school, I think it's got to be the dropper post, has it not? I mean, sure, the dropper post was in development around about this time. The RockShox Reverb was dropped in 2010. It was one of the first hydraulic sealed units with a remote action, but they really weren't commonplace. Even if you'd bought a GT Force, which was the full suspension version of this trial bike, you still would have got a rigid post. And it was very commonplace to come to the top of a hill and manually drop your post before you did some gnarly descending. And gone are those days, thanks to the dropper post. You can now drop it mid-ride, barely without thinking about it. And I think people will hail this as one of those game changer components. And obviously gearing has massively changed. We've got a whopping 27 gears over here, thanks to 3 chain rings at the front and 9 cogs in the rear cassette. We have a whopping 44 teeth up the front here is our biggest one. And in the rear it's 32, so it's almost switched around, as I often rock a 32 on the front and I'll go up to even 52 in the rear on my cassette at the back. The big difference though, I would say, is although you had more gears back then, the range was actually a lot lower. And if you took away all of the crossover, so for example, you won't want to run your biggest chainring up front and your biggest cog at the back because that's too much stress on the chain. And once you start listing out the different gear ratios that you have between the combinations of 3 at the front and 9 at the back, there were so many crossovers and so many similarities that a 27 or a 21 speed would actually usably come down to about a 13 or a 12 speed. So these days we have it pretty good. We have similar gear ratio, a bigger range, on all of that without the front derailleur, which I've got to say, I am happy to leave in the past. Don't you just love front derailleurs? Why am I glad to leave this? Well, not only is it extra weight and extra maintenance, these things are a nightmare to adjust. And I swear you'd press a button and often nothing would happen. And then check out the lack of clutch in this rear derailleur. That chain would bounce around on a descent and pretty much change gear for you. And you know what? Don't even get me started on how many levers you have on your bars and how skinny those handlebars are as well. And why is that stem so long? So does this bike deserve its own category in the mid-school? Yeah, I think it does. It's not retro, but it's certainly not modern. And things really have changed a lot in 10 years. Now, Enduro wasn't technically a bike category back in the 2010s. It did sort of exist. Enduro racing was starting somewhere in Italy, but it wasn't until the mid 2010s that we were starting to see enduro world racing and grassroots enduro in our own countries. But it was Mountain of Hell and Mega Avalanche that was kicking off around about the 2010s that really started getting that endurance downhill category going. And I think our love for that and our excitement about this new genre is what really changed trail bikes. Trail and enduro started to blur a little bit, and development in suspension and things like dropper posts really changed the game for normal riders like us. And frankly, I'm grateful. I think modern day bikes are absolutely amazing, and I wouldn't change it for the world. I think this bike can stay in the mid-school, in the 2010s, where it belongs. But what do you guys think? Do you think a bike like this would still hold its ground now? Are you happy on your mid-school bike? Are you glad things have changed to this kind of modern Nuke-Proof Scout territory? Let us know down in the comments below. Let's start up that debate on mid-school versus new school.